Both 2024 presidential candidates have ideas to fix the housing market, but neither stance seems to prioritize a key underlying issue.
A lack of competition is also contributing to the low supply of housing.
Enormous housing costs are a massive issue for many Americans. As we know, the housing crisis has been a problem, and it's been a problem for several years. And it's partly due to a lack of supply. But one massively underreported reason for that shortage in housing supply is the explosion of mergers and acquisitions in the home building industry. How did we not know this? Now, again, this is underreported, but CNBC did put together a fantastic video detailing how bad these mergers and acquisitions really are, how it translates to slower construction for much needed housing, and how it also drives up the cost of housing. So before we get into it, just know that the number of builders has declined 65% since 2007. And that was, of course, right around the time of the financial crisis. Now, first, let's find out just how concentrated the home building industry has become.
Over 400,000 businesses building homes in the United States in 2023. The industry remains fragmented, but the biggest firms have advantages that are helping them increase their control of numerous local housing markets. Just 10 builders are behind more than half of the new homes in 49 of 50 metro regions in the United States.
You're seeing cities like Tampa as an example, where today the top 10 builders have more than 80% market share. That just makes it very hard for any new builder to get a foothold.
If you look at relevant markets, well-defined for housing, then you see that in many places, it took the two firms that were merging from having 30% each to having 70 or 80 or 90% of the housing market.
That's a disaster for a number of different reasons, which tends to end with you being priced out of the housing market. And it's partly due to the fact that these home builders that just get bigger and bigger as they gobble up the smaller home builders, they really do have an interest in slowing down construction of new houses. That sounds crazy, right? Totally sounds insane. Well, by slowing down construction, that increases the value of the limited supply on the housing market, which means that they can sell their developments for an inflated price. We're gonna get to that in just a moment. But it's also important to understand, how the hell did this happen? How did this industry get so concentrated? Well, this report explains at least a few of those reasons. Let's take a look.
The largest 100 home builders in the United States were behind about half of new single-family home sales in 2023, according to researchers at Johns Hopkins.
The top 10 builders combined had 10% market share. Today, only 3 decades later, the top 10 have 50% market share. And Horton, the biggest, has 15% market share. So the concentration has been accelerating. My team estimates that about 2/3, 70% of the unit growth that the big builders are delivering is from acquisitions.
Hey, don't scroll away. Come back. Because before the video continues, we just want to urge you to lend your support to TYT. You power our honest reporting. You do it at tyt.com/team, and we love you for it.
Okay, so that again further explains just how concentrated things are. But what's really interesting is that, the economic crash in 2008 really destroyed the economy in more ways than most people realize. And it did spur the mergers and acquisitions, this explosion of mergers and acquisitions that we're seeing in the home building industry. Let's watch.
The two biggest home builders in the United States are D.R. Horton and Lennar. Both have outperformed the S&P 500 between August 2014 and August 2024.
Their business is really going gangbusters. And if you look at the stocks, they're way up because they were able to grab such market share. A lot of the small to mid-sized builders just simply couldn't make the math work. Their borrowing costs were so high that a lot of them either went out of business or agreed to be purchased by the larger builders.
And so the larger builders were able to weather the storm that came about as a result of the economic crash of 2008. They also have a much easier time with getting capital accessing capital. And so since they have more liquidity, it is easier for them to just gobble up all of the smaller home builders. And the barrier to entry for smaller builders is just increasingly impossible. And so there's this situation that has come about as a result of the economic crash that has really set the stage for these mergers and acquisitions that again translates to less housing being built, the housing market having insane prices associated with homes, right? That typical middle-class families used to be able to buy. And the other thing is, that's created the ideal conditions for the big home building companies who are making cash hand over hand. Meanwhile, the services they offer, and this is the important part to really hone in on, okay? The services that they offer are getting worse and worse. And this explains so much. If you're living in the suburbs, if you're living in a major city, it doesn't matter. I don't know if you guys have noticed this. I certainly have. All of the new developments, all of the new homes that are being built look exactly the same and they look cheaply made, okay? And there's a reason for that. Let's watch.
Experts believe that the industry became less productive as its lead companies consolidated.
The average builder, when I started in the early 90s, would tell the consumer that they would deliver the house in 40 or 50 days. Over the course of my career in the last 30 years, that went from weeks to months. So it's incredibly unusual that you have an industry where you have negative productivity, essentially, where it's getting longer versus shorter. To be honest, it's not like the house is super more efficient or more tech friendly than it would have been before.
They're also able to bring down their own costs because they've simplified the models of the home. There are far fewer actual floor plans and models that you can choose from.
There would be 10% more housing built if we had the levels of competition of 2006.
So if you kind of feel like the new homes that are being built look like prefabricated homes, I mean, there's a reason for that. They're specifically simplifying their model in order to lower their costs, but they're also doing something else. They are intentionally limiting supply in order to be able to sell those homes at a much higher price. So Louis Quintero, who is a professor at the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School, said the following: when you have a monopoly, you have an interest in withholding supply to increase demand, really to increase prices. That's what we see happening. And one of the variables contributing to the continuous rise of housing prices or house prices. We have some large dominant players who do not want to produce as much as they can because they know it will bring down the prices of their other units. So they intentionally avoid building, or they build over a staggered period of time. And so it explains so much. It really does, because it does seem to take much longer to build housing. As someone living in California, where we have a severe housing shortage, you'll notice that municipalities will provide these insane grants to developers and builders. And it'll take them so many years to build one apartment building, to build, one neighborhood of homes. And they do so at insanely inflated costs. Now, why is that? Well, there's less competition in this sector of the economy. There's less competition among home builders. And when you have this situation where you just have a few players that are super dominant, gobbling up everyone else, well, you're not going to have as much competition, and that's going to be a problem. We're experiencing that problem right now. And look, I want to be clear. This isn't the only factor in the housing crisis, but it is one of the main factors. And it is kind of amazing that up until now, there really wasn't much coverage of it at all. Like CNBC put this out and kind of put it on our radar, which I'm super grateful for. Look, we trash we do trash MSNBC, but we trash CNBC, especially like when it comes to their anchors and how nervous they get anytime a conversation of wealth redistribution comes up. But they also have some wonderful journalists who do reports like this. So I do want to give them, a thumbs up and give them props for covering this story. Now, again, you also get hit with the boring floor plans and the farmhouses and cubes that they put out there. Kamala Harris, by the way, has made housing costs one of her big issues that she wants to address, part of her economic policies. But unfortunately, her proposals have not really tapped into this particular issue, the issue of monopolization among home builders. And so hopefully someone will put it on her radar. But also keep in mind that tech billionaire Reid Hoffman, who gave generously to Kamala Harris's campaign, is hell-bent on ridding the Federal Trade Commission of Lina Khan, who's currently the head of that government agency. Why does he want to do that? Well, Lina Khan actually wants to enforce antitrust laws, thus preventing certain mergers and acquisitions from happening. And so it remains to be seen if Kamala Harris is going to make good on that, ask from Reid Hoffman. I really, really hope she doesn't make that mistake. But as we've also talked about on the show, politicians are just like anyone else. They are motivated by incentives and disincentives. So if the money talks, that's not a good sign for Kamala Harris's leadership on this issue. I don't want her to do away with Lina Khan, but we'll see what happens. The good thing is she's hyper-focused on increasing housing inventory. And she's also focused on doing something about private equity firms snatching up residential property to then rent out so they can be, the slumlords of the country. I'm totally against them doing that. And I'm glad that she has said something about it on a national level. Let's see if she actually does do something about it should she get elected as the next president of the United States.
Thanks for watching the video, guys. We also love it if you hit the join button below because that makes you a member. And members allow us to be independent, honest. We can be as progressive as we want, no corporate media influence. And that's all because of you guys. We love doing the show with our members. Hit the join button, become one of the Young Turks.